They said my father disobeyed orders. That compassion cost him his career. I was 17 when I watched him salute the court-martial one last time, then walk out under the rain. Stripped of everything but dignity. He never came back. Years later, when I heard the same words thrown at me, reckless, insubordinate, emotional, I felt that same rain on my skin again. Except this time, I wasn't watching. I was the one standing in the storm, breaking Navy protocol to save a family I'd never met. My name is Eris Thorne, and that night, I learned the one rule my father died believing. Sometimes doing the right thing means becoming the enemy of everyone who obeys. The sky looked like melted ink, and the wind screamed hard enough to shake the bones of the aircraft. My hands locked around the control yoke, muscles burning against the turbulence, while the storm outside tore across the bay like it was punishing the earth itself. The C-130 groaned under the weight of the wind, every rivet rattling as if it knew what I was about to do. The radio barked in my ear, ordering all flights to maintain course. No diversions, no exceptions. But the radar pulsed again. One faint red echo, barely clinging to life 12 miles out. A distress signal, civilian frequency. I stared at it until the static sounded like a heartbeat. The command center repeated their order, sharper this time. I could almost hear the fear behind their authority. Lightning sliced the sky open, a flash of blinding white. And in that split second, I heard my father's voice somewhere deep inside my head. The same voice that had carried me through every storm I'd ever flown. There are moments when you follow orders and moments when you follow what's right. I cut the radio. My voice was steady when I said, "Crew, we're diverting." Carter swore under his breath, but followed. The landing strip ahead was nothing but a flooded stretch of asphalt. Water crashing against the wheels as we touched down. The storm clawed at us, but the beam of our lights caught a dark SUV half submerged near the edge of the levee. Someone was pounding on the window. A woman's scream cut through the wind. We ran. The cold hit like knives. I pulled the back door open. Inside, a terrified mother, a crying child, and an old man whose lips were already turning gray. She shouted that he wasn't breathing. I pressed my palms to his chest and counted with the rhythm of the storm until he gasped for air. Choking, eyes wide. His trembling hand found mine. "If you hadn't come, my son would have lost his father tonight." I nodded, breathless, the words sinking into me like salt water. When we took off again, rain hammered the fuselage, thunder rolling across the sky. Carter muttered, "That command would bury us for this." "Maybe," I said, "but at least someone else won't be buried tonight." The storm swallowed the horizon as we climbed. I didn't know that the man whose life I just pulled back from the dark would be the reason my own career would fall into it. 3 days after the storm broke, the base came back to life, floodlights humming, the air thick with jet fuel and seaweed. I was summoned before sunrise, handed a sealed envelope marked Command Hearing. By the time I reached the discipline office, the hall smelled like disinfectant and fear. The inquiry room was silent enough to hear the air conditioner buzz. Across the table sat Admiral Marcus Cole, silver hair perfectly aligned, 4 stars gleaming on his collar. He flipped through my file as if it were a criminal record. "Lieutenant Commander Thorne, you diverted from the assigned route. No authorization, no confirmation. Explain yourself." "There was a distress signal, sir. Civilian vehicle submerged. 3 lives in immediate danger. And you believed violating direct orders was justified." "I believed doing nothing would have been worse." He studied me like a riddle he didn't want to solve. The hum of the AC filled the gap where humanity should have been. "The Navy doesn't operate on belief. Commander, it operates on discipline." He signed the paper with a stroke of the pen that ended my flight status. Suspended indefinitely. Reassigned to logistics. As I turned to leave, I heard him murmur to his aide, almost with pity, "Heroism doesn't feed logistics." That night, the words echoed through my head like turbulence that wouldn't stop. 2 days later, a young lieutenant forwarded me a video link. grainy footage of my plane landing in the storm online. They were calling me the angel pilot inside the base. I'd become the liability. It was almost funny how fast the same act could look like courage or crime, depending on who was watching. When I walked into the mess hall the next morning, every voice stopped mid-sentence. Eyes followed me, then quickly looked away. People didn't just fear orders, they feared anyone who reminded them orders could be wrong. Chief Carter caught me outside the hangar, lowering his voice. "They're saying the man you pulled out was someone important." "Real important." "Everyone's important when they're drowning," I said, forcing calm. Still, something in me tightened like a wire ready to snap. That night, I found myself back in the archives building, dusty, silent, the air stale with forgotten things. My father had worked there once before the Navy broke him. Among the rows of aging folders, I noticed one yellow envelope with smeared ink. It was addressed in faded handwriting. "Titan Marcus Cole Personal." My breath caught. It was my father's writing. "I fear we've built a navy that forgets the sea is filled with people not numbers. If you ever command Marcus, remember that compassion is not weakness." And beneath it one final line: "A navy that punishes compassion will one day lose its soul." The letter had never been sent. My knees felt unsteady. The man who had ended my father's career was the same one now dismantling mine. Same mistake, same sin, saving lives. I stared at my reflection in the glass cabinet, blurred, trembling under the flickering light. Outside, soft rain began to fall, tapping the roof like a warning. Another storm was forming, not in the Gulf this time, but inside me. They called my name as if calling a defendant. The briefing hall at Pensacola glared with sterile white light, bright enough to expose every ounce of shame. I stood straight in front of the assembled officers, while Admiral Cole gripped the report like a sentence he'd been waiting to deliver. "This, ladies and gentlemen, is what happens when emotion overrides discipline. The Navy is not a charity. It's precision." Each word landed like a nail against metal. No one met my eyes, but I could feel their relief. "Thankful it wasn't them," I asked quietly. "Permission to speak, sir." "Denied," he replied without looking up. Then, "Permission to breathe, sir." A few nervous chuckles slipped out, gone as quickly as they came. Cole closed the file. "You'll report to logistics effective immediately. You are grounded until further notice." The room turned cold and soundless, the kind of silence that swallows dignity. When I left, someone whispered, "She'll never fly again." Outside, I walked straight to the shoreline and took off my cap. The air smelled of salt and jet fuel, cold and bitter, an old perfume of failure. My father had stood like this once, stripped of wings and voice. He had stayed silent until it killed him. I swore I wouldn't. That night, I went back to the archives and rolled a sheet into my father's rusted typewriter. Under the dim yellow light, I retyped his unsent words. "Orders are written for the mission. Compassion is written for the men who carry it." When I hit the last line, "The ocean forgives only those who try." The power went out. I laughed quietly into the dark. The ocean forgives, but the Navy doesn't. The old radio sputtered alive. Chief Carter's voice cut through static. "Ma'am, word is there's an inspection coming from D.C. They're reopening your case." "Who requested it?" "Not sure. Maybe the Admiral's daughter, Dr. Lena Cole." The flashlight beam caught my father's photo on the wall, his eyes calm and defiant. "If the Navy forgot your lesson, Dad, I'll make them remember." A week later, the base felt divided straight down the middle. Half thought my punishment was unjust. The other half prayed the system would stay unshaken. I spent my days in the logistics office stamping forms, watching time die slowly on paper. Every time an aircraft thundered off the runway, it felt like part of me went with it. Each morning, Chief Carter left a coffee cup on my desk without a word. That day, he finally spoke. "You didn't disobey, ma'am. You just remembered why we wear this uniform. Try telling that to the man who wrote my reprimand. Maybe one day he'll listen by afternoon." I walked through the hangar. Tools clanged. Engines hummed. Conversation stopped when I passed. Then a young lieutenant looked up and said, "My wife's family was in that area during the storm." "Thank you." I smiled and moved on until I saw him, Cole, standing alone at the far end. Half his face was caught in the sunlight, half lost in shadow. We didn't speak, just stared at each other across the hangar. Two people waiting for the next storm. Near midnight, my phone buzzed. "Lieutenant Commander Thorne, my father will be at Pensacola in 2 days. Don't react, just listen." It was from Lena Cole. I sat up in the dark, thunder rolling somewhere beyond the window. The next storm wasn't coming from the sky. It was coming from the command building itself. 2 days after Lena's message, the base felt like a storm about to break. Every hallway gleamed, every salute too crisp, every breath too careful. From the runway, I watched the flags ripple under a gray sky, heavy with secrets. When Admiral Cole's convoy arrived, he stepped out with a posture built from decades of command, straight, cold, untouchable. Lena followed, her white coat bright against the wet asphalt. She glanced at me, barely nodding, then disappeared behind him. Inside the packed conference room, the air was thick with fear and ceremony. Cole's voice filled the room, steady as iron. "Lieutenant Commander Thorne diverted a classified flight, risking mission integrity for unverified civilians. This base cannot afford such recklessness." He paused, eyes locked on me. "Do you understand the magnitude of your failure, Commander?" I answered. Calm, but unyielding. "I understand the magnitude of a human life, sir." A stir ran through the crowd. I pressed on. "Was any cargo lost? Any crew injured?" He said no to both. "Then what exactly was endangered?" "My conscience." The room froze. Cole's grip tightened around his pen until the doors burst open. Lena strode in, voice trembling. "Sir, the civilians she saved weren't strangers. They were my grandparents. Without her, my grandfather, your father, would have died." Gasps filled the air, and Cole's face collapsed into silence. I said quietly. "I didn't know who he was. I just knew he was dying." Then I walked out before anyone found their voice. That night under the runway lights, Cole came to me alone. His voice was hoarse. "Your father wrote me once." I never answered. "I know." I said I found the letter. "He was right." Cole whispered. "Compassion isn't weakness. It's our only strength." And in that rain-soaked moment, I saluted him. The man who had finally remembered what honor truly meant. By dawn, the air around the base pulsed with rumor and unease. Something was coming. Everyone felt it. The message spread quickly. Admiral Marcus Cole had called a full command review board. Attendance was mandatory. No one knew why. When I walked into the main hall, the same one where my career had been dismantled weeks earlier, the light felt different. It wasn't cold anymore. It was expectant, heavy, like the pause before thunder. Every officer in the region sat rigid in their seats. On the stage, beneath the U.S. and Navy flags, stood Cole. The man looked older, stripped of his armor of certainty. Before him lay a single folder, mine. He began slowly, voice rough but firm. "A few weeks ago, I held this same file and called it a failure. Today, I see it as proof of everything we're supposed to be." The room went still. I could hear my own heartbeat over the hum of the lights. Cole turned toward me. "Lieutenant Commander Eris Thorne acted against direct orders during a Category 3 storm. She diverted her aircraft to assist civilians in distress, one of whom, I later learned, was my own father." A wave of whispers rippled through the hall. He raised his hand, silencing them. "She did not know that, and she didn't need to. She acted not for recognition or safety, but for the very thing this uniform was meant to stand for." He looked across the room, eyes clear and wet. "Rules are written to protect missions, but it is people who give those missions meaning. When rules forget that, it takes courage, not defiance, to remind us. For the first time, no one dared breathe. Chief Carter clenched his cap, eyes glassy. I saw a few officers lower their heads, not out of shame, but respect. Therefore, Cole said, the reprimand is rescinded. All disciplinary actions are nullified, effective immediately. Lieutenant Commander Thorne is reinstated to full flight command. No applause followed, only a silence that meant something deeper. Then he turned toward me. Voice soft but steady. Your father was right. We lost our soul once. Not again. My throat tightened. I managed only a whisper. Thank you, sir, for remembering. And in that moment, the Navy felt human again. A month later, I found myself in Washington, D.C. walking through the marble corridors of the Navy Department. The winter air carried a quiet that felt ceremonial, almost sacred. For the first time in months, the weight of my dress uniform didn't feel like punishment. It felt like a promise kept. The boardroom was vast, lined with portraits of men who defined centuries of naval law. I took my seat before the panel of admirals, each one expressionless, their ribbons gleaming like armor. On the table in front of me lay the new draft, the Samaritan Flight Directive. The same words that had once been whispered in an airstrip at Pensacola, now stood in black and white, ready to be judged by the highest command. I began calmly. The same way I'd brief a flight plan, this directive encourages naval aviators to render humanitarian aid during emergencies without fear of punishment, provided lives are saved. It preserves discipline, but it restores humanity. One admiral leaned forward, his tone clipped. And what happens when that compassion is misused? I met his gaze. Then the system judges intent, not fear. We can correct mistakes, but we cannot afford apathy. The room went still. A long silence hung heavy in the air. Then the chairman nodded once. Approved. It was a single word, but it landed like a heartbeat when the session adjourned. I gathered my files, numb with relief, and found an envelope waiting on the table marked with familiar handwriting. Inside was a single note written in firm, deliberate strokes. Your father once taught me rules. You taught me conscience. Between the two, I finally found honor. MC. I read it twice, then folded it carefully. My hands trembling. Outside the window, the first snow of the season began to fall, blanketing the helipad in white. The flakes drifted slow and silent like the ghosts of every storm I'd ever flown through. I thought of my father, of the day he stood before the tribunal, stripped of everything but dignity. He hadn't lived to see this moment, but his voice had carried through decades of silence to reach it. His compassion, once condemned, was now doctrine. I whispered to the empty room. More to him than to myself. We didn't just change a rule, Dad. We remembered why it existed. Outside, the snow kept falling, erasing every scar from the runway below. And for the first time in years, the Navy felt clean again. 1 year later, Pensacola woke beneath a clear sky. The kind of calm that only comes after something has been torn apart and rebuilt. The first storm of the season had passed, leaving the air salt clean, the hangars glinting under the sun. I walked across the tarmac toward the new rescue fleet, the wind tugging at my sleeves. I wasn't the woman who'd once stood here waiting for judgment. I was now the commander of the Samaritan Training Program. Each aircraft gleamed with fresh paint, the same phrase stankled beneath the Navy insignia, serve with conscience. Rows of young aviators stood at attention beside their planes, eager, proud, eyes bright, with the same fire that had once gotten me grounded. Chief Carter waited by the steps, coffee in hand, his grin as tired and kind as ever. Never thought I'd live to see the day they'd name a directive after you. Ma'am, it's not after me, I said. It's after what we almost forgot. He nodded quiet and stepped back as I climbed into the cockpit. The smell of steel and jet fuel was the same, but the air felt lighter now, freer on the instrument panel. I'd taped an old photograph of my father, his uniform pressed, his smile small but steady. Beneath it, the words I'd etched from his letter. The ocean forgives only those who try. Engines thundered to life, shaking the ground beneath me. I keyed the radio. Samaritan 1 requesting clearance. The tower's voice crackled back, calm and certain. Cleared for takeoff. Commander Thorne. I smiled. The kind that feels like breathing again. Copy that. Storms will always come, but this time we fly into them on purpose. The runway blurred beneath us as the plane lifted into the sky. Sunlight broke across the cockpit, blinding, warm, alive. Clouds opened ahead, glowing like waves of gold. Below the gulf shimmered and the flag at the hangar whipped in the wind somewhere between the hum of the engines and the heartbeat in my chest. I could almost hear his voice, deep, calm, proud. Well done, Eris. You finished what I started. And for the first time I believed.